Welcome to our next Aportio Technologies webinar series. We've been covering a ton of really interesting conversations and had really, really good feedback. And one of the conversations that I wanted to make sure, being an AI company, that we talked about is, what is AI? What's the value of it? What's the value of it when we're talking about enterprise, when we're talking about businesses, when we're talking about sales and marketing and internal? And I know that a lot of people are really, really scared that it's just Skynet. This is the beginning of the end. Skynet is here. Well, I'm having a ton of conversations about this. And so today we're bringing in Mr. Tom Lewis from TTEC Digital. We're bringing you in today. You've been a really big, huge background in advisory roles, huge background in AI. I would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell all our listeners, anyone watching, about you.
Thanks for having me. I lead TTEC Digital's consulting, analytics, and AI practice. I've spent most of my career in management consulting between PwC, Deloitte, and Accenture, and I was the CEO of a AI research company that turned IVR chatbot, which is sold to private equity. So relative to the AI CX intersection, this is pretty much where I've spent my career, and had the good fortune to run into Susan and Scott over that whole journey as well. So again, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. So a big part of the conversation across industries right now is, well, first, people don't really understand AI in the first place. Totally understand it's a relatively new technology that's out there. But really, when it comes down to it, when you're the technical person and new technology is being brought to you, now everyone's looking at you as the thought leader. And so now people in those industries are now being looked at as being the thought leaders when it comes to AI, and they don't even know where to start, and the technology is evolving so quickly. So this is the conversation topics today. I would love for you guys to discuss how you're seeing AI is being brought into businesses and the biggest issues that are being brought up.
Sure. I mean, I'll go first. The fact is that I think as traditional or narrow AI entered the marketplace, CIOs, CEOs were all like, stay away, and it's dangerous and things like that. And then when ChatGPT and generative AI came out, they came to those same people and said, why haven't you done anything on this? And so it's sort of a dichotomy. But at the same time, it's like, well, there's a good reason, because a combination of factors actually influence risk within the organization. And so exposing the technology to your own employees can be risky if they don't understand. I mean, there's plenty of examples where people have uploaded confidential information in order to have this thing produce some sort of result. Can't do that. As well as externally facing systems. Most recent one is in your neck of the world, Desiree, around Air Canada chatbot agreeing to a refund where the agent said no and it had to go to court. And so there is risk associated with this, but there are also opportunities relative to, I think the two primary areas is internally facing broadly and software development. Those are the two areas where I think you can control the risk a little bit more and get a tremendous amount of value out of it. But those would be my headlines.
What do you see as the new technology is evolving, and you're definitely walking into brand new conversations, the biggest risks that people are worried about?
Well, I think the biggest risks are of the unknown, and I think to Tom's earlier point, the challenge that a lot of the organisations who are now grappling with this is that the people that are meant to be the experts are being usurped by the son or daughter of the board member who's using ChatGPT to finish their secondary or tertiary kind of assignment, and then showing mum or dad how cool it is, and driving this whole, well, how come we're not using it, and what's our IT organization doing to deliver it. So in a way, and there's been a few technology shifts that same sort of thing has occurred. But I think that's put a lot of IT teams on the back foot. And when IT teams are on the back foot, the easiest answer is no. And we can all come up with good reasons why no is a logical answer, but it's not necessarily the answer the business needs. The challenges that we're certainly seeing, the whole acceleration around generative AI, whether it be for developing code or for implementing solutions like our own going to help accelerate different steps in the business process is that the IT team are grappling with, well, have we got Skynet here, or are we actually injecting Skynet into our environment? And secondly, are we clear on where our data is, who's got access to it, how it's being used as part of a business process, and is that kind of, are we suddenly throwing all our IP out into the ether, and who is this crowd, OpenAI, and do we trust them, and all those sorts of things sort of come into it. So I think the challenges there, and then you add the whole challenge around the code, AI generated code, and confidence levels around, well, what backdoors are potentially in here. How do we, if we're using AI to generate code, that's fine, it's written this for us well first time round, but now we need to do a release, we need to improve it. Is it going to rewrite the whole, is it going to completely rewrite itself? And therefore, we're not just talking about adding a new function, we're actually redeveloping the app every time we do it. So getting that kind of process, thinking around change control and release processes around these technologies that are evolving, and in the process of evolving, they're actually changing the process itself, is sort of completely counter to, and we've just been talking to a customer at the moment about a go live process where the traditional change control and release process is completely out the door. And how organizations grapple with that and land at a place they feel comfortable is, I think, the biggest challenge of all.
And I think the other thing I'm seeing, is probably you've both seen it as well, is that I'm an ex-CFO. And so my question was always, when somebody brought me a business case, was, so is this future-proof? How do we know that we've got the latest technology? If you have decided on something a month ago and it's coming to the board this month, well, this technology has moved on 100 miles by the time it got to the board. So future-proofing has got a whole new different angle to it right now in AI, because you need to know that you're able to keep up, or your supplier is able to keep up, rather than is what you're releasing today. Now, that was last month's technology by the time we got the board to approve it. It's a different way of thinking about future-proof because of the exceptional speed at which things are changing or improving. And you can have 100 arguments on whether the curve is going up faster or slower, or there's going to be a slowdown. And then, so you can talk about any of those, but the one thing you can be certain of is that what you looked at a month ago is not what's available in the market anymore. There'll be something new available, and you just cannot keep waiting. If you keep waiting, then you're just going to fall behind.
Well, and it's interesting. You can stitch both the things that you guys said together. A few things. One, Trudeau, right, as the Prime Minister of Canada. I don't know why you would quote him, but apparently, one of his famous quotes now is that, technology is moving faster than it ever has, and it'll never move slower than it currently is. And so when you talk about stuff that is outdated next month, well, yeah, that's right. But the pace of change is part of what the modern business world needs to get used to. So starting with that component. The other, Scott, you were talking about, I'll call it resistance, the trepidation, what have you, around acceptance. The fact of the matter is that we're not going back, and businesses are going to have to figure out how to use and deploy this. And you can be a catalyst in that, or you can be an obstacle in that. And my suspicion is that the more you're an obstacle, the more you're going to get run over. And that's partly because of the pace of change that I'm talking about. So by the time you figure it out, you're already going to be several iterations behind. Now, I think there's a lot of prudence to be placed in not risking the organization. You talked about code migration or code control and things like that, and backdoors. Those are perfectly viable and concerning problems. And so trying to figure out the priority of the leveraging the app of the stuff and figuring out where you can incubate it and test it versus where you're going to actually expose it to, we'll call it production in all senses, is a valid question. But you better get on that strategy, and you better get on that path to develop that for your organization, as opposed to just dragging your feet, because that is just simply not going to work.
think this challenge of uncertainty, of volatility, constant change, that the leadership teams need to just take a big deep breath and say, okay, this is not a question of can't, it's a question of how do we mitigate the risks to an acceptable level to take advantage of this when it's changing so quickly. So that's the conversation and an execution point of view that needs to happen.
Someone mentioned that now C-suites are going to start looking at hiring automation engineers who literally work within the business and are meant to go into each part of the business and look at what automations can help them work smarter and faster. Move, repeat throughout the different parts of the business. And I think with this conversation, what you guys are saying is that there's going to have to be some sort of framework when it comes to companies that are evaluating the impact of AI and how that actually plays in their long-term plan when the technology, like you said, that you proved today was already out of date 2 months ago. So how do you think that's going to help the C-suite in decision-making?
I think a common perception, and I think it's still true, was that when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT and generative AI in general, people were trying to figure out how much disruption is this really going to cause. And, on the one hand, you could look at the milkman and the elevator operator and say those jobs are gone. And then you realize, oh, yeah, but, there's lots of other technology that wraps around that. And then the steam engine and so forth. Those are the ones that typically are mentioned. And so the adoption is, the thought is, well, this is going to eliminate jobs and it will change the workforce. But the point I was making was that the initial premise was that those people who figure out how to use the new tools, I'll just call it that generically, in their job are the ones who are going to be the most successful. And so those who can't figure out how to adapt are going to be left behind, essentially. And that, more importantly, that what the studies and sort of the perception was finding was that the efficiency of those more experienced people using the more experienced tools was greater and was helpful in accelerating both development as well as just overall business and so forth. So if you put that in context, that's the rosy picture that says there's an opportunity for everybody. The other side of that is that there is in certain industries is going to be skill sets that are essentially, I don't know whether you want to call them knowledge workers, knowledge engineers, prompt engineers, if you want to get really specific. But what I'm referring to is people that are responsible for tuning the machine that is operating one angle of the business or not. Most of my life is spent in the contact center, call center, and so when you think about automation in there, it's a very ripe environment for that, for sure. And so instead of having an agent answering the call, having automation do that, and having a knowledge worker constantly tune and improve that chatbot or that IVR, it seems very logical to me. And it's a new skill set, and what it may actually end up being is that the workforce shifts from tier one support agents, contact center agents, what have you, to maybe fewer tier one, maybe even fewer tier two, but a lot of tier three, and that's actually where the expense is going to be, and that's a higher expense, higher value equation for these types of operations, and that's in that customer service realm. But I think it applies to almost every industry, and that's sort of what's fascinating, and I find it fascinating. Some may find it scary.
Just interested in your thoughts on this concept, putting together Desiree's comment and the comment you made about this automation team moving around. My experience in new systems is often the problem we have is that the people that really understand it are not the same people as the ones that are capable of doing the prompting, or the automation team is not an expert. They move around, but they're not experts in the area that they're working with. And of course, the people that are doing the doing aren't experts in AI. And what do you see emerging in the market to make sure that people that understand the business also can help make those decisions?
Yeah, I think the analogy I would draw is, well, first of all, it's a fluid environment and we're still in, our absolute infancy relative to this kind of technology. Back to the, it's only going to, the pace is going to change, is going to accelerate. But the analogy I would give you is once upon a time you had to program computers in, assembly language. That was a long time ago. And then it got to more structured programming languages. But because structured programming languages are not something everybody can do, particularly the people who understand the business, what was developed was WYSIWYG, click and drag kind of technology to enable the business processes to be visualized. There's still code behind the scenes that is generated by virtue of those things. So if you extrapolate that one level further and think about the tools that will be created or already starting to be created that will enable that business person to instruct the machine properly, that's sort of the continuum I see relative to making sure that it's not just the technologist. It's in fact not just the technologist. That's actually what's fascinating about this. It's very much the business angle of this as well.
Yeah, and certainly I can see a situation evolving, and this is where I think Tom mentioned earlier about the type of skill sets are going to change and that they're going to become more expensive, and I guess I'd add to that scarcity, and the access to those skills I think is going to be the challenge for most corporates. Is not a question of where should we put it. It's kind of, well, how can we actually resource ourselves to be successful in applying it in those areas. So I think that gets back to some high level business strategy discussions that says, well, what is our point of difference, and where do we need to ensure we're investing in accelerating our point of difference, because if we spread ourselves too thin and try and apply this technology in all places, we're going to run out of skill, and we're going to run out of money, and we're going to run out of focus. And so we've got to kind of be very, very focused. And then I think it's about how you get the right people with the right skills, and let's use prompt engineer as a title. I think it's a good example. They understand how to make the machine do what you need it to do, but they don't understand the business problem that you're trying to solve.
Right.
So it's about getting the companions in the room together. It's about sort of saying, okay, we've got, this is BA kind of stuff, but really it's saying, okay, who's the business person that really understands this process, and let's get them alongside a prompt engineer. And then, to the point about WYSIWYG, the ability to create solutions, powerful solutions on the fly, with the right tools in place to then actually transform business process. And whereas previously it was, okay, let's have a workshop, let's go through a 3-month scoping exercise, let's kind of then do a pre-prod, let's do some testing, we'll do some customer kind of validation that this is the right thing, and then we'll do a waterfall methodology around the build, and we'll roll it out in 18 months. That basically we're sort of saying, okay, we walked into the workshop this morning, we unpacked this issue, and actually we need to be in a position where we're actually putting that into production tomorrow. That's the challenge. Now, the technologies are out there. The challenge is actually finding partners that can actually help you with that, and whether that be people like the TTEC Digitals of the world who provide that kind of focused capability and skill set around the necessary requisite, not necessarily domain expertise, but kind of the engineering expertise, if you like, to actually assemble it. And this is also the challenge for MSPs, in the service provider space. Customers, in the absence of having those skills themselves, they're turning to people who should have those skills, and that's really challenging service providers, kind of saying, well, how do we get the right skills in our business, trained in the right way, and actually facing the customer?
Although, are you forcing me to look in the mirror and suggest that maybe we won't need consultants in the future, and that all of this will change that dynamic? It could be, right? Because my job is to translate business needs into technical, capabilities and things like that, and it changes that whole dynamic, I think.
Yeah, no, look, and I think we talked in one of our other webinars about no-code platforms and the evolution of those, the citizen developer, and I think the the role of the consultant in that is to be the expert facilitator. But it's something that used to take was a 9-month engagement is now a 9-day engagement. I think that's the challenge.
Conversations that I've been having in almost every room that I'm in when it comes to AI is that consultants are going to be the ones kicking us off, because businesses, which we'll bring into the next question, but a lot of businesses, by the time they decide on something, they're 2 months, 3 months behind. So the idea of having that position that I talk about, the automation engineer, that starts as a consultant approach, because you're not going to hire someone to do that because you don't even know what it looks like first. We even talked to bring out this conversation in a marketing with AI. You think that content creation is going to be ruined by AI, because then you don't need people to do content creation if AI is going to do it, but you need the original thought. So it makes it more valuable. Consultants become more valuable because you're exposed to more things like technologies. You're able to learn more things faster in different ways because you're always forcing yourself to be in different rooms. But that brings us to the next question. What ways do you expect AI to be affecting customer relationships and service models across various industries?
So it's sort of like the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, because what you find in the technology realm is that every single vendor is got a new tool in their toolbox, and it radically changes the way that they're thinking about their own business. I'll give you a specific example. There was a software company I was working with that provided like customer interaction on your phone. So, you might get a chat and say, or a text and say, go fill out this form, and then it would continue on with the rest of the thread type of thing. So it was a way to interact, sort of like a static chatbot, if you will. That doesn't quite make sense, but it was software that interacted with the customers. And typically an implementation took 6 weeks. It was a WYSIWYG, design the business flows for this interaction. And like I said, 6 weeks. They put a generative AI front end on that tool to basically sit in front of the click and drag, the flow charts and so forth. And they reduced the development time from 6 weeks down to 2 weeks. Now, the thing produced the results in not very long, but had to iterate through it and perfect it and so forth and test it. So if I told you that the development lifecycle for a customer interaction of any kind could be reduced by 2/3, you can sort of extrapolate that to all of the different technology and all of the different ways that it's impacting customer experience. The other thing I would say is, in the traditional consulting model, my job was to help a client prioritize what to automate, essentially. And from the brand or the company's perspective, it was, what can I automate? What can I, shove down the cheapest channel? From the customer standpoint, it's, can you offer me effortless and frictionless interaction models? So depending upon what your point of view is, you're still solving the same problem. So you would go through and you'd prioritize those things, typically on, the volume of them and the complexity. And at some point you would run an ROI for each one to determine if it was cheaper to do it through automation or cheaper to just continue to have humans do it. And you'd hit a wall. Well, if I, again, go back to the story I just told you, which is, if I could tell you that some of the implementation life cycles could be cut by 2/3, you can automatically see how that ROI line moves down sort of this Pareto curve of contact types and so forth. And so you end up with more automation, again, from the company's perspective, and hopefully, more effortless and frictionless interactions from the customer's perspective. So that also is iterative and recursive. It's a tremendous opportunity to change. And so the last thing I'll say on this is, so how can enterprises differentiate themselves in this model? And by the enterprises, I'm talking about the end customer, not the software companies, but the end companies that are servicing a product or what have you to an end customer. And the answer is sort of, the acceleration through this, because I can tell you that customers choose the channel and the brand that they choose based on which one is going to take the least amount of effort to get the job done. Price is a component, features and what have you, but with all other things held equal, the idea of not having a lot of friction in the model is huge. And so that's not only is this iterative and recursive, but it's differentiating.
One of the things that kind of scares me when you just said, Tom, is that we're going to get more automation, less human touch, making those choices. The last thing I need is another experience like the rental company I talked to when I had a problem where I could not, for the life of me, get to a human being. And this was a little bit complicated. So when you're talking about reducing friction, how do companies, particularly in this customer services space, reduce friction while still providing the personalized service that customers need? Because that, to me, is more important than lack of friction.
So I'm going to hit it sort of from backwards for a second, because one of the most amazing things about generative AI is it allowed us to take unstructured data and really interpret it in new and novel ways. So the experience that you had, as an example, it's entirely possible or even likely that that brand, that company, doesn't know that you went through that experience, and more importantly, doesn't know that that's actually probably this consistent experience that customers are having, except for some maybe customer satisfaction survey, which really doesn't point them to the exact problem. If, on the other hand, you applied a robust analytics program, which ingested all of the live agent conversations, all of the IVR conversations, all the chatbot, all the social, what you'll find quickly is where those points of friction are. And so relative to the human versus machine, the idea is the company may think that they're doing a good job, but they don't have the insights and the ability to have impact relative to the changes that they would make to change that process. And so before I can answer the question around prioritizing what should be human and what should be automated, I need to understand what's currently causing friction in my customer journey. And that's how I would approach that. Because if there's no friction, then, well, first of all, that's rarely the case. And I think the story I tell is that the gap between consumers' expectations and brands' delivery relative to service and sales in the customer support realm is $1 trillion opportunity. The reason I say that is because it's damn near infinite relative to the improvements that consumers think that brands need to make to eliminate the experience that you just had.
I think that's a really interesting kind of theme, because what's the role of the exec in this journey as opposed to what's the role of the front line? And the role of the exec, to my mind, is to do two things. One is to create some guardrails that sort of says, okay, we need to stay inside this box, whether it be an approach to execution or some tool sets or kind of some high level kind of parameters that say, well, we've got to control the playpen somehow, so we've got to put a fence around it. The second thing is sort of prioritizing where to point. So, and I think that's where the analytics that you're referring to, Tom, is so powerful, is that it used to be anecdotal, and now you can absolutely quantify and qualitatively support based on evaluation of unstructured information that says, hey, we used to think we had a squeaky wheel over here. Now we know that the squeak is actually not just a squeak, it's a howl. That's helpful, but that's where I reckon that's where the exec should try and stop. After that, it's actually about the people on the front line. Getting that balance right is the real opportunity and implication.
Yeah, for sure.
This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and we could go on for years and years and years, and then we'd be behind again. But to finish it off, Tom, and thank you so much for joining us today, I would love to know for our listeners if there is any book that you would recommend or podcast that you have leaned on throughout your career that you find that would be really beneficial to anybody.
Based on this conversation, a business book that I would recommend is The Effortless Experience. We were talking about friction and reducing friction and so forth. This book is all about that. It's by Matt Dixon and the Corporate Executive Board. Came out a few years ago. I've probably read it 12 times because every time I read it, I get new insights. And it's still very relevant. So that would be a business book. Relative to sort of team building and understanding execution and those sorts of things, I would also recommend The Boys in the Boat. It's about the rowing team that is at I think it was the 36 Olympics in Germany. And it's a fascinating story about what it took to get there and to win it.
Thank you again so much. And as always, Susan and Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us from the other side of the world. I hope it's sunny.